Good morning from New York. I'm Jay Levinson, the director of MoMA's international program, and I'm honored today to be introducing a conversation between the museum's Sean Anderson and the eminent photographer Dayanita Singh, who is joining us from Delhi. Sean is associate curator in our Department of Architecture and Design, and most recently was the co-organizer with Mabel O. Wilson of Reconstructions, Architecture and Blackness in America, the first exhibition at MoMA to focus on the work of African-American and African diasporic architects. One of my most widely traveled colleagues, he has practiced as an architect or taught in places as diverse as Afghanistan, Australia, India, Italy, Morocco, Sri Lanka, and the United Arab Emirates. Our guest, Dayanita Singh, is a remarkably thought-provoking artist who uses photography to reflect and expand upon the ways in which we relate to photographic images. She has recently been concentrating on her museums, a series of mobile installations that allow images she has produced throughout her career to be endlessly edited, sequenced, archived, and displayed as interconnected bodies of work. In the midst of this unprecedented year, Dayanita has graciously offered to provide us with a first-person account of her experiences in India during the pandemic. We are so grateful for her participation today. I'll now pass the microphone to my colleague, Sean Anderson.
Thank you so much, Jay, for your generous introduction, and greetings to all of you around the world. Really quite extraordinary to see all of the greetings from literally every continent, I believe, every time zone. So this is morning here in New York and evening in Delhi with Dayanita, and everywhere in between. Hello and welcome, and thank you so much for joining us today. Before we begin, I wanted to thank very much Jay once again and the International Council and international programs, but especially to Nene Jallo, Marta Dancy, and our really exceptional AV team, who is composed today of Zach Pruitt and Mitchell Lightshoe. We couldn't be here in the Zoom universe without you. So not too long ago, as the pandemic was escalating throughout South Asia, and we here in New York City were emerging slowly, opening up, relaxing restrictions, I asked how we might be able to support those artists from our collection, especially in those regions where the profound effects of the pandemic are still being experienced by many. And so today is an informal gathering, a conversation among friends, in part to show our support for artists in India and South Asia, but also as a means to share our own ideas and thoughts about lived experiences across the past 15 months. Today, Dayanita and I will be talking perhaps in two modes, I thought, that I believe are reflective in part of her extraordinary body of work as an artist. And in a way, I feel like we're going to be looking not only at the present as a past, but also the past as a present. So without further ado, I would love to welcome Dayanita to the screen and to the grid.
Hello, Sean.
Hi, Dayanita. Good
Hello,
evening.
Jay. Thank you for doing this.
We couldn't be here without you, and so it's our pleasure to join you today. And as I mentioned, we are separated by great geographic and time difference, but here we are together, all of us, in this Zoom grid of the world. And so we're incredibly grateful for you to be joining us today. I just wanted to start though, Dayanita, with a simple question that might have many answers. Maybe that's our whole conversation today. How are you? And how is your family? And how are things outside your front door?
I am well, even more well today because I had the opportunity to look forward to this talk and wash my hair and wear my favorite perfume. It seems like months since one has done something like that. My mother as well, she is also suitably dressed to listen to this conversation in her apartment. I'm on my own. She's in her apartment. I've been on my own now for 15 months. And outside is still quiet where I live, but otherwise, once the lockdown has opened, people have gone a little crazy on the streets and in the markets, and it's just inevitable that there will be a third wave. I'm vaccinated. My mother is vaccinated. Um, I'm, yeah, I'm happy to be talking to you, to be alive,
Thank
to
you.
be here.
I mean, it was a conversation that we were having, in fact, over WhatsApp, like we often do, that in a way prompted me to talk to Jay about this potential conversation. So I'm very excited as well, and I'm glad that you have on your favorite perfume for this conversation. I'm very pleased. So I wanted to start because our conversations quite often diverge. They move across many landscapes and many spaces, from the photograph as an object to architecture, to Jeffrey Bawa, to everything. And this is why I've always been so grateful for your company and your friendship. And I thought I would ask you about what these 15 months have been for you inside your home, inside your studio, because your studio is part of your home. And what maybe have been the, say, the immediate effects of this being inside, really, being in your home? And what have been the immediate effects on your work, if any, and on your thinking?
Of course, in the beginning, we didn't know how long this was going to be. And even just at the start, to think I would be locked into my apartment, even though my studio is upstairs, was a very frightening thought, because I'm used to being on a flight every week. And, in my adult life, I have never spent this kind of time in one place. So even a month is too much for me. So I was very, very anxious in the beginning. And then I remembered what my mentor Zakir had told me about his chilla, a sort of, a, what should I call it? A ritualistic practice where for 40 days you are locked into your room and you are given food twice a day. So you give your plate out and you get food, and your guru is outside, and you're meant to just keep practicing for every waking hour and not even sleep too much. And I thought, okay, so I'm going to treat this time as my chilla. And luckily, I had just scanned all my contact sheets. So I spent 10 to 12 hours every day looking through my scanned contact sheets and seeing images that I hadn't even noticed before, because contact sheets are small, and then suddenly to see it all enlarged and to see so much work. So I realized right at the start, I have to occupy myself. Otherwise, I could sink into a terrible depression, and the immunity would go down. And it was difficult because it was hell outside. It was hell the first time, but the second time was really, I was really scared and quite frightened. And the only way for me, and I thank God, I'm an artist, and so one can always just keep working. And I thought that's what I have to do. I can't stop. I can't sit in front of the television. I have to keep making work. And so I started, what do I know to do best is to make books. And so I'm working on 3 books, and very seriously, and there's no immediate deadlines. I don't have to do anything, but giving myself deadlines like, by the 15th of April, this book has to be ready, and, sort of trying to behave like everything's going to be all right someday. But the advantage I have is as a book artist, in the worst case scenario, even if I can never travel again, I can send my PDFs to Steidl and he would still publish them and the work would go out. And that was the other thing that really gave me comfort, Sean. I hope I'm able to explain it. Because, you know, in the second wave, especially, one thought, as one does even now, you know, like, will one make it? Will one be alive for one's exhibition next year or whatever else is being planned? What really gave me comfort was that my book objects were in your house and in so many houses in different parts of the world. The books as well as the book objects. And so somehow the idea that my archive was in your house, you know, it might seem completely frivolous to someone else, but for me, that was good because then I could go because I knew that my archive was with you. And Sean, I think you have 3 of my boxes. So that means that there are 3 bodies of work in your care. And I don't know if it's just someone who's a photographic artist or all artists. Your archive is what you have. No? That's your child. And the concern is what happens to this archive. And the archive is such a tunnel. And so I was just very, very thankful to have those book objects. Of course, to have my work in your museum, of course. But even more than that, if I could dare to say, to have my little museum bhavan in some homes in the world, to have center letter there, to have the book objects, that somehow my work would be taken care of in some library by someone somewhere, you know, that one wouldn't just, yeah.
No, I always think when I'm changing an image, you know, in one of your museums, in one of your book objects, I am always imagining that someone else somewhere in the world is doing the same. And I wonder if they have chosen that image like me, or what the mood might, like how my mood might change because of the image, and vice versa, right? Because your work is so much about reciprocity, and the reciprocity of, I liked how you just described it as is in our care, right? You have generously, in a way, distributed your work across the world to collectors and to museums and galleries, of course, but it is we that activate it.
Exactly.
You have given us that opportunity to activate it. So in a way, maybe each of the book objects, each of the works is its own chilla. Right?
Mm-hmm.
That we are practicing a kind of, I wouldn't want to say meditative, but a kind of work upon ourselves as we are generating the image.
Yeah, when I made the work, I had no idea that I would be so grateful to it, and so grateful to each person who acquired the box, either because they wanted to or because I bullied them to. I'm so grateful, really, each house that hosts my box.
I'm always envious of people who have many of them, right? And then they can do this all the time if they wanted to, 1 day a week.
Yeah.
And I was trying to imagine just yesterday, the last time that I saw you in physical form was probably in 2019, maybe. Mm-hmm. But you were working on the maquette, on the Zakir maquette, and you had just released Box 507 as well. Yeah. So I think we'll talk about that. And I wanted to just remind you that today I am speaking to you as curator. So even I have this fragment with me today. So do you think that you, by virtue of being inside and by virtue of having this time with your work and this kind of close proximity to your work, do you think you saw things differently or returned to images or spaces differently?
Oh, absolutely. For one, I think I saw my house differently,
Mm.
I've never spent so much time here. I've never seen the changing light, and the highlight of my days used to be at 3:30 to sit in that couch and watch the light come through those trees and travel to the ceiling, reflect over there, and then do a circle. And that was my daily ritual. And of course, light being light, it changes every day. So slight shifts would happen. And so, first, I think, was just realizing and almost, if I could say, falling in love with my apartment, falling in love with the light and waiting for the light, and making rituals out of that and running from room to room because how is it today over there? Not that my apartment is that big, but there are lots of windows. But I started to look at my contact sheets and I was amazed to see my early work. Early work, I mean, from the 80s before I became a photographer. And I was quite sad because I was actually a very, very fine photographer. I just didn't know it. And nobody told me. And there was such a tender, vulnerable quality. And, I got a little annoyed with my colleagues who saw the work at the time and said, oh, you're a woman, experienced motherhood and that kind of stuff. But they could have also told me that it's really beautiful work. So, and that is something I felt I lost when I went to study photography, that there was something happening in sort of my, uh, because I wasn't making photographs. It was like making rubbings of things I wanted to remember. And it didn't matter what the light was like, what the frame was like. Uh, and there's a richness to that work that, the other work is fine too, but there's a very special quality. And then because while it was hell outside and I had this beautiful oasis to be in, I don't think I would have had the chance in my lifetime to go through 40 years of work. So I have now finally seen every image I ever took. And only about 20% or 30% of that has been published. So one of the things was to write to Steidl and say, these are the 11 or 12 books I would like to make before I die. And you have to stick around because we have to make these books. And I didn't hear back from him, which is quite typical. And then I get a call and he says, so shall I put all those books in the catalog for next fall? I said, no, Gerhard, we can put one maybe. We can't do my life's work now in 6 months. So it's my book world and the book connection and looking forward to books and planning books from early work that really kept me going. And I'm very, very grateful to you, Sean and Jay, for having made this evening for us. Because, if I can be a little blunt, I did think to myself that we call ourselves an art community, but we're all on our own. There's nobody other than, I happen to work with an amazing gallerist in London, Jane. So other than Jane, there was nobody from my art world, and of course my few friends, that was really concerned or asking. And I guess it was like that for everybody because everyone got so involved in just trying to survive this somehow, But the community that I found was actually in my locality where I live, which is Vasant Vihar. And there was a group formed and we were exchanging messages about vaccine and, who needed oxygen and which hospitals had a bed. And so that was the community that developed. But it really made me wonder, what is this art community about? We meet every year, every other year at some biennale, at some exhibition, at some opening. And so you have the idea you're part of a community. And there was no community. There was, as an institution, if I'm not wrong, or certainly in my experience, you're the first institution that has reached out to even say, is there anything we can do? And you cannot imagine, maybe you can, what that means. There is nothing you can do at this point. but just to know that somebody is asking you that. And I had a message, a WhatsApp message when things were really bad in Delhi. And I think we spoke also around that time, from Jitish Kalat, to ask how I was. And Jitish is not even a close friend of mine. We're not in touch on a regular basis. But I thought, one person in this entire community, other than my 2-3 friends, So that was, in a way, that's good, because that bubble burst, the idea that you were part of a community. And I don't include having an auction or two to raise money for COVID as that community. That we all have done as much as we could, and much more than one could as well. So everyone has done that. But somehow your gesture really, really means a lot. So thank you for that.
My pleasure. I mean, I think what we're talking about right now is also something I've learned about very dearly in the last year and a half, is about mutual aid, and how we all need and also demand that communities actually come together in ways that we may not even know what they look like yet, but that how we establish linkages to each other in a time where we're all kind of autonomous rectangles in a grid on a screen is incredibly important and incredibly valuable to not only maintain relationships that we have had, whether they're, temporary or not, but also just as a means of grieving with each other, of supporting each other, of thinking with each other. And what I kept finding over the last 15 months or so was that, yes, we were having these extraordinary conversations online here and with artists, distributed across the world. But you're right, is that at the end of that hour or two, what are we left with, right? We're left with a recording that's on a cloud somewhere. And so community, mutual aid, reciprocity with work, in a way, for me, has at least become a new way of seeing, right? Is that we see through the ways in which a community is cultivated and strengthened.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that has been the big realization, the community and nature, I think this time of COVID has really brought nature into my house. I have a tree in front of me right now, and which has a colony of about 100 parrots in it. And that those have been my sort of friends that have kept me going. But also the idea of this community here. And to my surprise, some of the younger photographers have been really supportive. Some of the ones who work in the media, especially, is there anything you need that we can come by? It's sort of shifted. It's shifted the idea of the world, of my world, that I had before COVID and now, and I'm curious how it'll play out once one comes out of this time, because I've actually realized that I like this time on my own, and I like the routine. I had to set up a routine, because otherwise, as you live alone, it can be terrible. So, yoga in the morning, singing class at night, somatics every other day, and work in between. Like the book has to go to press tomorrow. And of course, it's not going anywhere, but just the routine and nature and community. And it's different communities than what I had imagined for myself. But yes, and in India especially, I think in the second wave, also in the first wave, but in the second wave, it was really friendships and kindness of people that kept us going. The government was not doing anything. Yeah, I think the people did it for each other, anonymously, on groups as well. You didn't even know the person, but you tried to help in whichever way you can. People have really done amazing, amazing things for each other while the government was, doing their elections and Kumbh Melas.
Yeah, I mean, and speaking to that, I mean, many of my friends who I would try to reach out to were talking about groups where they were trying to, find a hospital bed or find an oxygen tank and so forth. I don't necessarily want to focus on these contexts, and we'll get onto talking about some of the work that has been brought up in some of your Instagram stories and in our conversations. But I just wanted to ask you for a moment about the images of cremation grounds that suddenly appeared almost in every media space I can imagine. And all the time that I've spent in India, the cremation is perhaps one of the most sacred rituals. Speaking of rituals, it's also one of the most private and intense rituals. And here they were being broadcast to a world, maybe not necessarily understanding what their significance is. And yet it was telling a story about not only this isolation that we're thinking about today, but also about the nature of images. And so I just very briefly, I wanted to ask you to reflect on those.
I think when I broke down was when I saw the images of the bodies in the Ganges, That's when I sort of howled and I couldn't believe we had come to this inferno, that we were living through such times. But I am so grateful to the photographers who risked their lives and went out and brought us the pictures of the mass cremations, because that is what made everybody, and I'm not talking about the rest of the world, but that made people like all of us realize the seriousness of what is going on. And the government here had to pay attention. I shudder, Sean, to think what would have happened if we hadn't got those pictures. Now they've, of course, banned photography at the cremation grounds. But I feel we really owe something to those photographers. There was Danish Hussain, Ishan Tanka, a few others who went regularly, went out. So they're risking their lives and just going out, but also bringing us the images that made, and then the government had to act. So in this particular case, those are make or break images. I really don't know where we would be if we hadn't had those images. So I'm very grateful to those photographers, very, really.
I mean, I think so much of those images too as speaking about a very particular moment in Indian history, in world history, and as you said, a world on fire. I mean, in so many different ways now, that just thinking about the nature of ritual, on one hand of bringing people together, and in many cultures, that ritual is about community building more than it is about the kind of perpetuation of time or temporal ideas. And so those, for me, started to register an entirely different scale of cities in particular, noting that these grounds were appearing in places where you would never imagine them.
Yeah.
And so this is not necessarily a very easy segue to talk about, but I started to imagine in terms of the work that you did with Mona and Mona Ahmed, and in a number of your Instagram stories, you were kind of, I don't know how to say it, like amplifying your experiences with Mona. And so I started to think about that body of work, which I know that you think about very often, is a kind of elegy. An elegy, an elevation, an amplification. And so for our audience, I was wondering if you might talk about what that work with Mona, what that friendship and that bond with Mona has brought to you today. And just to note for everyone listening, Mona Ahmed, I'm not sure how long she lived in the cemetery, but I was hoping you might be able to talk about that.
Yeah, Mona Ahmed is probably the most unique person I have met in my life. And I met her in '89 and she passed in 2017 and was my best friend. And as I was saying to someone, she was like she was sometimes my mother and sometimes my child. And on the street, she would become the patriarch and abuse anybody who even dared to look at me in Turkman Gate. And the moment we got inside her house, she used to live in a house full of eunuchs. We would go into her room and then lie in bed and talk like two girlfriends, advice on sexuality and or just sort of things you talk to your girlfriends about. Not to say that we only talk about sexuality, but so with Mona, I had a very rounded friendship that had many facets, and it was part of who I was. And now I think in this time, it became part of who I am, and it still is. But it's in this time that I realized I would not have been the artist I am today, whatever I am, without Mona in my life. Because Mona is the one who really taught me how to think out of the box, that every situation is a challenge and there's a secret solution waiting inside, in that problem. So it's like when the museum says we can't pay for your framing or your crates, bringing in your benches. I just say, oh, interesting. You're paying for my museum. Let me fit my tables and chairs inside. You won't even know. So, I mean, that's just sort of in a superficial sort of way. But I think Mona really, really impacted. Mona and my mother have been two, so there's Zakir, there's Mona, and my mother. These are my three mentors. And my mother and Mona also had a very interesting relationship. And then I always thought somehow that she would outlive me, that, I didn't occur to me that she would die before me. And we also spoke like that. I don't know how. So when she passed, I was surprised. I thought I would be devastated. And instead, I started to feel Mona was inside me, that she was here, and she's here right now. And there was this white owl that came into my balcony one morning and sat there for half an hour looking at me, and I'm convinced it was Mona. Why else would a white owl be fascinated by me? And I was fascinated by that owl. But then a very interesting thing started to happen. I had been making these architectural montages, as you know, pictures that were just seamlessly fitting into each other. So cutting them, and then they would just collapse onto each other. And somehow, just while I was moving a pile of prints around, exactly as how the architectural montages happened, Mona landed in one of my family portraits. And then I now have a set of about 40 Mona montages. And Mona has become part of the family portraits. She's entered file room. She's part of my work with Saroj Khan, the choreographer from Hindi cinema. And I mean, Mona would be thrilled because, to be sitting in one of the houses, she always said that I photographed families with my rich camera, which was the Hasselblad, and photographed her with my poor camera, which was the Leica. And so I said, it's not like that. They're equally, it's a different format. But anyway, she was very jealous of the work that I did with the families. And so So Mona showed up in these montages. And somehow it has been, I think, of course, knowing that my mother is a few houses away, but knowing that Mona is there, and this incredible training that I received from Zakir, in how to be an artist, how to live the life of an artist, and what that means, and how important it is to keep learning. And in fact, Zakir has famously said in some documentary about learning to learn. You have to learn to learn. And I feel that somehow these three in my life have really kept me going. And Mona, I mean, look at her. She's going to have a book of her montages very soon. And the fascinating thing, which I found in this COVID time when I was looking at everything, Mona had made montages of her own work 20 years ago. When the Myself, Mona Ahmed book was published, I'm sorry, I don't have it right here. It's in the other room. She took the book to a computer person in Turkman Gate and said, I want you to take me in front of the Taj Mahal, in front of a forest. I want to sit on a tree. I want to be in the Swiss Alps, because her publisher was from Switzerland, and like everybody at that time, she had her own fantasies about Switzerland. So actually, I think Mona just sort of gifted the montages to me. I feel like I was just a medium, and she made these montages herself because she had already done that 20 years ago. Like really crude Photoshop, but they're beautiful. And one of them was made into a giant wallpaper, and she had it in her house till she passed, where she's dancing in front of the Taj Mahal. And so, when you have people like that in your life, somehow that just keeps you going. And my mother, who's every day on Google trying to learn something new, and because, it's a strange thing to say, but she's alive because of COVID. When she had her heart attack last year, and she was gasping with her last breaths, and we were rushing her to hospital. We made it to Max Hospital in 8 minutes. But at any other time, it would have taken us 40 minutes to an hour.
Yeah.
So while there are all the terrible stories, of course, heartbreaking stories of COVID, there is this other story. I keep forgetting what an important story that is, that she's really alive because there was that lockdown. It's weird, but it's true.
I mean, I think of those montages, they're likened almost to Ravi Varma lithographs, but they're also likened to just, mythological stories. You see those montages everywhere, and I love them. And they're as much about projection as they are about imagining oneself, right? And it's not darshan, but it is a kind of darshan to think through being somewhere else, right? And so much of this time, I think for many people, has been about thinking about where else could I be? Where else would I want to be?
Yeah, maybe that's why, like you said about changing your cards in the boxes, maybe that's why the books give me so much comfort, because I know that the work is somewhere else, that there is this connection somehow. There may not be an immediate art community that one is part of, but I've made a sort of community of my book object collectors, that I'm there somehow. And some friends have sent me photos that they've made exhibition openings of Museum Bhavan and just taking one out, or, to do something special with their partner. And I feel I made Suitcase Museum way before COVID. But now if you wanted me to do an exhibition and I couldn't travel and we didn't have the budget for work, I would just send the suitcase.
Yeah.
And it would go in a normal flight as cargo, but it doesn't need special shipping, papers, insurance, and all that. I'm just sending you a suitcase, and you show the work.
That's what we did for Dhaka. in February.
Exactly. Yes, yes,
I
yes,
had
yes.
the great pleasure of installing that work in the Dhaka Art Summit in February. I mean, that was the last time I traveled, and that was the last kind of event that I attended in person. And I remember you and I I think on the phone, trying to decide what the arrangement would be and how other work in the space would reflect that work. So it's, on one hand, I think there could be a question about the kind of breaking up of work, right? It's like it goes out into the world. But
yeah.
For me, I feel like your work actually, by going out into the world, is actually coming together, right? It's linked to far more complex geographies, and I'm not just talking about physical geographies, but intellectual, conceptual geographies that connect them and connect us to them and to you.
And that's the huge advantage of being a book artist. I'm really grateful that that's the form that I got drawn to, because for precisely that reason, there is now this community that each book builds up. And, you know, while it's very nice to be speaking to an important institution, one never knows how long that interest remains, no? Whereas with the book, and that was the reason from the beginning, I somehow from the very start knew that it wasn't really about, that I had to always have my own route as well, that I couldn't depend forever on museums or publishers, that I had to find my own route. And the books have given me that possibility, and I already know that it works because of this time. I imagine it must have been much harder for artists who work with other forms, no?
Yeah. The kind of singular work, for instance, or what have you. But I would just think that your book objects or your books are interiors unto themselves. And so perhaps writing Gesteitel with the next 12, as it were, looking at your calendar for the next 10 years, is in some way, it's building an interior within an interior. It's an extension of your interior, but it also allows entry into, I think for us, allows entry into a very particular, very kind way of seeing, but of seeing each other. I remember the first time I looked at File Room, for instance. And not only are you immediately fascinated of just that space, but so I also kind of registered the tenderness with which an attendant might carry one of those millions of files, right? And that the meaning of carrying or supporting or caring for that one file was as significant as all of those files. So there's already a kind of inscribed idea around generosity, I think, and respect.
Yeah.
Respect. I hasten to I'm looking at the time. I hasten to add one more question, but I wanted just to ask a little selfishly about Box 507. And about your relationship not only to Sri Lanka and to the Sri Lankan architect Jeffrey Bawa, but also I feel also with the work of Balkrishna Doshi, and how architecture has filtered into your work in its physical form, but also in its almost in its metaphysical form through your work. So if you mind just talking a little bit about your relationship to these spaces and these buildings.
Yeah, I think I was having a similar conversation yesterday, and I think what I have learned from the time with my travels with the musicians as well as with Mona is how to create a mahal, how to create an atmosphere, how to create a mood. It's very difficult to explain. It's not just atmosphere, it's not just mood. But I learned that from classical music and from traveling with the classical musicians and from Mona. But I think I started to use that with my book objects and in how I would offer them to you, you know, how I would, the mahal I wanted to create around everything. And I think architecture does that too. It creates a certain mahal. And like with the archives, I can sort of smell where the mahal is going to be there, you know, like with the file room, I just sort of knew which ones I didn't photograph everywhere I went, just like I don't photograph all the architecture that I've been to. But there's a certain mahal that gets created with how the light bounces off Jeffrey Baba's black floor onto the white wall of the lobby of the Kandalama Hotel, for example. Or Mr. Doshi's, the light in the afternoon in Mr. Doshi's house with the wooden shutters, and it's all indirect light coming from the top. So I think more than architects or architecture, I was drawn to the mahal that gets created with their buildings through light. And I think that's also my connection with Mr. Doshi and we were thinking of even calling I'm making a book of our conversations, because that's something I've been doing, having Zoom conversations with Mr. Doshi, showing him photographs and him talking about the photographs. So we're going to make a book. And it's all about light. And obviously, I mean, every photographer needs to study architecture and every architect needs to study photography. But more than that, it was really the fact that I'm somehow now very drawn to the mahal and the very careful calibration that mahal requires. So for example, in that Kandalama corridor, you put a fire extinguisher or you put an ashtray and it's gone. The mahal is gone because it was so carefully calibrated. And so a lot of the photography has also happened in Japan, in contemporary art museums, because so much, you can't mess around too much. You know, you can't just have plastic chairs just stacked against the wall. So the light still gets to do its dance like it was doing in my apartment. But certainly, I think the training or the riyaz of learning, of the riyaz of understanding mahal is what has led me to architecture, to find just the right notes in that architecture. And Jeffrey Baba has those. And maybe we can end with that story of my going to the Kandalama Hotel into that corridor. And I knew when I turned that there would be a large volume and how the light would come. But I'd never been to Sri Lanka before. And I thought, I've been here. I know this person. I know the man who has made this. And Channa and me spoke at length about it till we realized that both Jeffrey Baba and I were very inspired by the Padmanabhapuram Palace in Kerala. So, you know, it's chance that I've learned from music, chance that I've learned from Mona, and as an artist, I think that's what I do. I'm completely open to chance. And I really sort of, if I worship, then I worship chance and I create the circumstances for chance to happen. But what form it'll take, I don't know. And so when I see that light in Kandalama, I know I have to then go to the next place that I can. Somehow it takes on a route of its own. And now I have these folders right here, actually. So that even though I work in digital, I still make these contact sheets.
Nice.
No?
Yeah, very nice.
And so I have a pile of them. And that's what I've been doing. So the archive, to sum it up, I think it's that rich archive that has kept me going. And sort of I've been quite audacious on Instagram, where I've suggested to photographers that 20 years is just growing up and studying and all that. Another 20 years is sort of feeling your way around the world and making pictures and building your archive. And then 40 to 60 is the time when you start focusing on your archive. But when you're 60, you go into the forest of your archive with your hard drive and see all the interconnected tunnels. And architecture has been there for much, much longer than I realized.
It sounds very much like a guru who I met once in Benares, who said something similar. I think I need to go into the forest sooner rather than later. But
right.
I'm going to pause now, and there are a number of questions here in the chat, and I would welcome all of you who are joining and still with us. If you have any questions for Dayanita, I will try to coalesce them. But I wanted to start with my extraordinary friend and colleague, Lucy Gallen, who organized the Museum Bhavan in 2019 for the reopening of the museum. And so I'm going to read what she has written. And here we go. So, Dayanita, I remain so inspired by the way in which you always name and pay tribute to those individuals who have been strong influences and teachers and people who keep you going in your life and work. Before COVID, it was still the same in this regard. You have always honored them and named them in this way. You remind us all to do the same and to note and thank those who serve as our pillars and our teachers. Thank you for that. I can't wait to see the book of Mona's collages. So it wasn't a question, but it was a very profound.
So beautiful. Thank you, Lucy.
And you're absolutely right. You're one of the few artists that I have always seen, you know, having the back of other artists and supporting them in various ways.
Because it's because I think what I was dreading at the time of COVID was you take conversation away from me and I can't do anything. Conversation is key. And it's in this time of COVID that I realized that I can also have a conversation with my archive, that it's all there. But I cannot but keep going back to those key conversations in my life. They sustain me even when the people are not, like in Mona's case, when she's not there. Yeah. But
archives speak, Dayanita.
Yes, yes, yes. And how? In fact, Sean, there are days when I sort of look at a photograph and then I looked at another folder and I see that photograph 20 years ago, a connection, and then I start to go towards it and it becomes an obsession. And I have to stop myself. Thank God I'm doing this yoga and the somatics and I breathe, because I think like I might lose my mind, you know. Sometimes I worry about losing my life to COVID, but then I think I might lose my mind to the archive because it is so interconnected. I didn't move very far.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's I just settled down the same people.
Yeah, I mean, we're always writing our own narratives, right? Everything that we see, whether we want to or not, we have to accept or not, but that creates these kinds of I don't know, these kinds of lineages through light that we interface with in various ways, and I think in a way that when you speak of community, you're not only speaking of community as a physical manifestation of people supporting each other, but we're also talking about the linkages that we have with ideas and the linkages that we have through ideas to imagine a better space.
Yes, 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 yes.
And I wanted to, there was a question a moment ago here, I'm going to just, by one of the attendees who asks, I'm wondering what do you think the art community will grow out of in terms of its purpose after the pandemic? What are the underlying important factors or actions that need to be addressed and take place for the concept of an art community, quote unquote, to develop more maturely?
I don't know about the art community, but I think because I'm not sure there is a community there. And so I can't answer that. But what I can say is, I hope that through this time, we will, those of us privileged enough to be working as artists, will think of our own practices in our shipping, in our values. And if it is about sharing the work, you know, can we, I would urge my colleagues, even if they're sculptors and painters, to look at the book as a form, as an exhibition in itself, and not just a catalog. And, you know, maybe I can't make it to Berlin for my retrospective, but maybe each of the rooms in that Martin Gropius Bau could be a book that Steidl can print for me, and the book can be on the wall, as I have been doing for the last years. That somehow I feel that in this time, we will realize that we know the value of the book, but we will understand the value of the book as exhibition. And that immediately changes the logistics involved, no? You know how cumbersome that can be on this earth. So it's like time to think about that as well. But I feel that what has sustained me is my work in the domestic space. And, you know, of course, every artist is different. And, you know, who am I to say, make a book or make sure it gets in somebody's home? But I can just say that for me, it's an immense privilege to be in your house. Yes, in your museum, but in your house. My work is alive in your house. And perhaps if we have more forms like that, and art can be more brought back into the domestic space as well, rather than just being things that are made for large institutions and collectors. And that kind of art world is anyway, I don't know what will happen to that art world.
I'm thinking of, I'm cognizant of time, and perhaps we can extend our conversation a bit if Zach and Mitchell allow us. But there's a concept in Islamic art, but also it's in Arabic language, maktub, meaning it is written. Mm-hmm. And I've always been thinking about that as an idea, that it is written. It is a book, right? It is written, and in a way that when we think of art as is always being in the process of being written, be known, is very much in keeping with this, what you're advocating for, right? Yeah. Is that as work is seen and as work is displayed and considered in the space of the home,
dispersed.
Exactly. It becomes written. And so we're writing our own histories with you. So I'm going to have one more question. And there are a number here that have just appeared. And I wanted to of course, I'm reading and so I wanted to ask, okay, so here's a question. I want to thank respected Dayanita Singh for changing my perspective on photography. And I have a question that confuses me. I like questions that we don't necessarily know why we're asking, but all right. So how should one balance consumption and creation of art if one is a constant creator and yet is a bad consumer because of restlessness, and yet is consumed by the art rather than consuming it? I think the question about the could we, in effect, separate ourselves from the art that we produce? And is that separation about allowing for others to consume it? Or are we always, as producers, also consuming that art, perhaps?
Well, I have a very simple answer: make a book.
Excellent, excellent. Very complex question.
But it serves both purposes, no? And that is one of the strengths of the book, that and make as many books as you like. And now that you can self-publish, it makes it even easier. And, you know, make a whole library, make a book every day if you like. And think of ways to disseminate it.
Right? It's a number of questions and comments have appeared about the past and the present, and whether the meaning and approaches toward both have changed, perhaps during the pandemic. I mean, very much what we were talking about throughout this past hour that seems to have flown by.
Yes.
And that's a beautiful way of thinking, right? That time is not necessarily fleeting, but growing as we speak. And so I want to close then perhaps with this idea of that's related in this question about the past and the present, and what do you imagine moving forward with your work? Are you going to You're going to continue these projects, obviously, the 12 maybe, or more. Do you feel like there would be a new body of work that emerges from this time, or new objects? What do you think?
There will be new objects for sure. I was just talking to Stephanie yesterday and saying, why are we calling this my retrospective? Because my newest work there is my oldest work. So I now have a 40-year archive to wade through. And of course, it'll throw up many new forms and ideas for books. And so there will be lots of new work. There will only be new work, but it'll be made from work that I already made. And that's something I would love to propose to photographers or people who want to make work with images, is to give yourself enough years to be able to work with those images, you know? In a way, I feel that I'm starting now. Like I've collected all the raw material, and now I have it all, I've seen it all, and now the work starts. So in a way, I'm 21 now, I'm starting. And years of an archive will keep me going. But you know, who knows what will happen. And so I would leave by thanking everyone who has my book object in their house or museum bhavan or sent a letter. And I'm very, very grateful to all those people for giving space in their house to my work and keeping it alive.
So I'm going to leave it there in the space of generosity and in the space of love. I feel that, and also to acknowledge that you are very much a teacher and a mentor for me. And you have allowed me to think about architecture in radically different ways through your work and through our conversations that I've appreciated and enjoyed so much. And so I wanted to conclude by just saying thank you to you. Thank you for joining us. Thank all of you who have spent time with us today and your questions.
Yes, thank you.
And please take care, Dayanita. And onward.
Yes. See you soon.
Thank you so much.